Hi everyone, and welcome to our Ask Me Anything show. Over the past few weeks, we've had primary and secondary school pupils send in questions to us for our young people of different faiths to answer. And today I'm delighted to have two members of the Muslim faith with me to answer your questions. So I have Alina Rafi, who is from Clydebank and is an analyst in a pharmaceutical company. And I have Rakeen Syed, who's living in London and works at the Three Faiths Forum and is also studying for his master's. So welcome to you both. What we're going to do is we're going to have a little introduction about what the Muslim faith is about, and then we'll go on to the different questions that have come in to us. So I'm going to start with you, Rakeen. If you could tell me a little bit about what you think is important about the faith of Islam, the Muslim faith.
Sure. So I would say one of the key beliefs in Islam is this belief in one God, and that God is all-seeing, all-hearing, all-knowing, all-loving, and is the creator of absolutely everything. And I'd also say that the other important thing is that we believe that the final messenger or prophet of God is a prophet called the Prophet Muhammad, and that's after a long line of prophets throughout history. And Muslims find it really important to follow his character through his life and his sayings, but we also draw our inspiration from the Quran, which is the holy book of Islam. Other than that, I would say that kind of 5 pillars of Islam are really good ways to kind of characterize the practice of Islam. So that includes the belief in one God and that the Prophet Muhammad is the final messenger. There's also the importance of prayer, and prayer is really important in terms of anchoring yourself to God throughout the day. Then you have zakat, which is charity, and that's kind of purifying your own wealth and helping the community around you. You have fasting, which many people know during the month of Ramadan, people fast throughout that month. There are also other times. And then you also have pilgrimage, which is, again, really, really important. If you can, you usually go take pilgrimage to what is now Saudi Arabia in Mecca. If you're able to kind of financially and physically, it's really, really encouraged.
Great, thanks, Rakeen. And do you have anything to add to that, Alina, about your faith?
Only a little bit, because Rakeen's given a fantastic introduction. The only thing that I would say is that throughout the world, Islam is the second largest practiced faith, and there are approximately 2 billion Muslims around the world. So no matter what corner of the world you go to, you'll probably find a Muslim somewhere.
That's great. Thanks, Alina. So now we're coming to our first question. And that question is, did you choose your own religion or did you follow your family's religion? So I'll start with you first, Alina.
That's a very interesting question, and to be honest, I hadn't really thought about it like before in a lot of depth, but now when I do kind of think about it and look at it in a bit more detail, you can, a lot of the time, like as Muslims, like in my case, for example, I was brought up in a Muslim family. And when you're brought up in a Muslim family, you traditionally are taught from a very young age all the different aspects of your faith. So whether that's reading the Quran or praying or going to the mosque, all of these things are kind of drummed into you from a very young age. So I would say initially, like when I was younger, I followed the faith that my parents brought me up in. But as you get older and hopefully wiser, you begin to kind of look into things in a bit more detail and try to understand why is it that I do certain things this way and not that way. And when you begin to get to that point, you begin to kind of look into your faith a little deeper. And when I got to that point and I started to study my faith a bit more, and I began to understand that now I've got to the point where I can say that I have actually chosen to follow this faith, because you can only kind of follow what your parents teach you to a certain point, but then after that, when you're a bit older and you start making your own decisions, it's up at that point up to you what way you want to go. So you can either follow it or not follow it, and I would say that I've got to this point and I've happily chosen to follow this religion.
Thank you, Alina, that's really interesting. How about you, Rakeen? Do you have a similar story? Or?
Yeah, I would say I completely agree with that. I think Lena put it lovely. Where I was brought up in a Muslim family. I have family that are of different religions, but my immediate family and the faith that I was brought up in was as a Muslim. And I think throughout my life, like early in childhood, I didn't think about it. It was just my reality. But I think as you get older, particularly as you start to meet people from different faiths and different backgrounds, you do start to think about your own identity, your own faith, how you're going to, how much do you want to commit to this faith, how much do you believe it, and all this sort of stuff. And I think, well, I'd like to say from my own experience, you make a conscious decision at some point in your life to either commit to a certain level to your faith, whatever the faith is that you identify with. And I don't think that that's like a one decision that you make, once and then you never look back at it. It's one that I think you're constantly having to like navigate and make constantly throughout your life. But definitely, I think it's a bit of both. I was brought up in the faith, but I definitely chose the faith at some point in my life.
Great, thanks, Rakeem. That does make a lot of sense. So we have a question here, again, really interesting question, and that is, what do you like about your religion? So what do you like about following your faith? Alina?
I would say personally, the thing that I really like about my faith is that not only does it teach you to look after your sort of immediate family or your own community, but there's a real sense of humanity within the faith. So we're always taught to look out for others, to be selfless, to give to charity, like Rakeem mentioned earlier as well. And that is something that, because a lot of the time when people think of religion, they often think that it's just something to do with one person and their connection with God. Whereas when I look at my faith, I can see that, yes, it's to do with you and your connection with God, but there's a wider aspect to it as well, and how you live and how you look after your environment, how you treat your community, and all of that is a part of my faith as well. And if you abide by that and you follow that and you look after your community and your environment, then you actually do get rewarded for that as well, and which is one of the beliefs that we hold. So I think that's a fantastic thing.
Okay, thank you. How about you, Rakeem?
I'd say it's actually quite similar. It's building on what Lena said, because I think for me, I've always loved the idea of charity, and I know a lot of faiths have the kind of virtue of charity. It's a really good thing, and for me, I really like the idea that charity is like kind of it's in the religion. Like there's no kind of reading around it. Like it's something it's definitely there. And we're not only just told to kind of give to those closest to us or to those who are most in need, but it's constantly something that we're told to evaluate. Whether it's our local community or something further afield. And what I love about that kind of concept is that we're not only told, like you're giving to someone who's in need and therefore it's good for them, but actually I think the emphasis is told, well, actually you're doing something good for your own self. You're purifying your own kind of soul. You're worshiping God in that way. And I think for me, if I think about what I think of as kind of worshiping God, I don't necessarily always think of things like charity and things like that, but I love the fact that could actually be included as an act of worship. And I'd say the other element to it would probably be prayer, because one element I really like of prayer is that we just, in the ritual prayer, if it happens 5 times a day or however many times a day someone chooses to pray, a lot of the time, most of the time, Muslims are told that they are praying in Arabic, which is the language of the Quran. And what I love is that you could go anywhere in the world. As Alina said, you'll find a Muslim any corner of the world, and if they're praying, you're all sharing that language. So you might not even be able to speak to that person in that language, but you can pray with them, which I really like. It's something really kind of deeply connected about people you might not even have known beforehand.
That's interesting. You can all understand the same prayer at the same time. Great. So actually the next question was about prayer, so I'll ask that to Alina, and the question was, how do you pray? And why do you pray, and what is that like?
Okay, so prayer, like Rakeem said, is one of the kind of fundamental pillars of Islam. So it's something that, as a practicing Muslim, you're encouraged to do daily and multiple times in a day. So as Muslims, we are told to pray 5 times a day. And the way that we pray our kind of our regular prayer, which we have to pray 5 times a day, we have certain actions that we have to do while we're praying, and we also have certain prayers that we have to recite while we're praying. So that's like one form of our prayer. But even out with that, so we're not really confined to only pray for those 5 points in a day and that's all. You can pray whenever you feel like it, whenever you need it, whenever you want to. And in that case, it can just be simply, like, you don't even need to utter a word. It can just be whatever you're thinking and whatever you're feeling. Some people do actually want to vocalize what they're feeling, what they're thinking, and that's also fine. And a lot of the time you'll see Muslims when they're praying, and they put their hands like this, which is primarily how we pray, out with our kind of 5 kind of daily prayers.
Okay, so you can pray 5 times, but then any other time as well. That's lovely. Did you have anything else to add, Joaquin, before we go on to the next question?
I think Alina put it perfectly. The only thing I'd say is just, you know, that kind of having that 5 times and the option for much more is, you know, a really lovely way to kind of anchor yourself throughout the day, because it's all based on the cycle of the day, you know, when the sun rises, when the sun sets. So like you can have the hustle and bustle of the world going on around you, like your work or your studying or whatever it is, but then you have that kind of moment to kind of step back and disconnect from this and reconnect to something much higher. And I think that's really refreshing to be able to do that 5 times or more a day is really nice.
Super, thank you. And I'll come to Joaquin. So we have another question here, and this is about going to the mosque. So do you go to your place of worship, and why?
So yeah, I do go to a place of worship. Usually when I go, it's on a Friday, and that's because Friday is supposed to be the kind of holy day for Muslims. They have what's called congregational prayer, or Jummah, which is a large group of people getting together to pray, and that's usually around kind of midday time or noon time. And yeah, the reason I go to the prayer is because in the Quran it says essentially, regardless of whether you have kind of trade or things going on in your life that are really, really important, just for that moment, kind of let go of those things and put God first. And I really, really like that. So a lot of people, whether they can, and you know, in terms of health and in terms of being close to a mosque and in that community, they'll go to the mosque. And the mosque, what I really like about the mosque is that from the very beginning, it was kind of viewed as the center of community. So not only is it just a place of prayer, actually, you know, it has a lot of community services. The ones in this country in particular, you know, you get access to language lessons, you get access to support, counseling, all these sort of things. So you really get a good sense of community. And especially during times like Ramadan, the holy month of fasting, or the Eid prayers, for example, they're really lovely times to go to the mosque, because you have a number of different events going on. The mosque is packed full of people, you have food going on. It's really, really lovely environment. And it's just that kind of cornerstone of the community as well.
And Eid, that's a festival, is it?
Yeah, so there's 2 Eids. Eid literally means celebration in Arabic, and there's 2 of those in the year. So you have the Eid where you've been fasting the whole year, and then there's one where it doesn't include that kind of fast for the month. And they're essentially 2 celebrations for Muslims throughout the year.
Super, thanks, Joaquin. And how about you, Alina? Do you go to the mosque, and why do you do that, if you do?
Yes, I also do go to the mosque, and I think the mosques in the UK are good in the fact that a lot of them do cater for women. Some mosques in the Middle East don't often have areas for women to go to, because within the mosques, men and women are usually segregated. But within the UK, I think almost every mosque now has a section for ladies. And like Joaquin was mentioning, Jummah, which is a Friday prayer. So men are actually instructed to pray the Friday prayer at the mosque, whereas women don't necessarily have to, but they still have the option to if they want to. And just like Joaquin was saying, for the Muslim community, our mosques are pretty much just like the hub of the community. So just like Joaquin was saying, it's where we laugh together, where we cry together. So we have like our good events, our happy events. We also have like funeral prayers and things. So it is really where the community gets together. And also, like we were talking about how it doesn't matter where you go in the world, but everyone prays in the same language, and that's also a really good thing when it comes to mosques. So even if you go to a mosque in another country, you might not know the national language of that country, but you always do, you know that you can, like, you hear that call to prayer, which is in Arabic, which you know, and then you can pray in Arabic as well, regardless of whether you can speak to anyone or not, but you still have that connection with God. So it is just the hub of the community, and it's where we all come together. And I think it's something that we've all been missing just because of the coronavirus pandemic, the fact that we can't go to our mosques. But hopefully that will all clear up soon and we can get back into our mosques as well.
Thanks, Alina. Yes, I think a lot of people from different faiths have been saying that as well, looking forward to being able to meet again in person and how important that is to them. Going on to the next question, I'll stick with you, Alina, for now, because we've had a question about wearing special clothes, and that can be both in terms of going to the mosque where you go to pray, but also in your day-to-day life. Are there special clothes that you wear, and why?
Yeah, so a lot of the time, for Muslim women in particular, we can be recognised because a lot of Muslim women wear hijabs. So hijab is part of clothing which we are commanded to wear by God. So in the Quran, God or Allah tells Muslim men and Muslim women to dress modestly. And with the whole hijab, so there's some women that just wear hijab, there's some women who also wear long dresses as well, which are known as abayas. Some people also cover their faces as well. So there are different forms of hijab, and to that point, you can kind of choose how much you want to cover. So that kind of comes back to what Rakeen and I were talking about, how much you want to commit, or how basically where you want to stand with your faith. But primarily, Muslim men and Muslim women are taught to dress modestly and to act modestly as well. And I think also for women in particular, because a lot of the time when people look at Muslim women who wear the hijab, they think, oh, they've been forced to wear this, or they've been told to do this, it's not their choice. But a lot of the time it is our choice, and I can speak from personal experience. Like, it's weird, but like my parents actually told me not to wear the hijab, but I said no, I want to. And my parents' primary concern was that I'd get bullied, or I'd stick out like a sore thumb, and I wouldn't know how to deal with that. And primarily, like at first I did, I'm not gonna lie, like I did stick out like a sore thumb. I was the only one in my school who wore it, so everyone knew who I was. But I think with that, it kind of encouraged me to learn more about my religion. And I think now that I'm older, I can feel that not only am I following God's command, but it's also a good, for women anyway, I feel like it's a good statement to make that society can't really dictate how they think you should look, or they think that you should dress, or they think women should be. But that is in your own hands, and that is kind of what our religion teaches us as well, that you shouldn't be judged on your looks or your appearance or how you are portrayed, but it's your deeds and your actions, and that's really what counts. So I think that the hijab is like a big symbol of that, and there are various reasons why different women around the world would wear it, but that's personally my reason for wearing it, because firstly, it's a big part of my religion, and secondly, that it's a good statement that I don't really need to conform to what society thinks or the beauty standards of society, whereas I can just be myself and kind of use my intellect and my thoughts to kind of shape my character, and not necessarily be judged just solely on how I look.
Thank you, Alina. That's really, really helpful explanation. Helps us to understand a bit more about wearing the hijab, which is the headscarf. Rakeen, are there any special clothes that you wear or need to wear in your day-to-day life or at the mosque?
I would say there is definitely modesty definitely extends to men as well, and that kind of men have their own hijab in the sense that, especially if you're praying, going to the mosque, generally, modesty is just such an important concept in Islam. But for example, if you do go to the mosque, or you are in a kind of praying environment or context where you want to pray, you usually, especially men, according to some kind of opinions, you should not kind of expose anything that's above the knee. So Muslim men usually try to make sure that they're kind of wearing trousers or something that definitely goes kind of below the knee level, and that's something that's kind of across the board that you'll kind of notice. If you ever went to a mosque, you'd notice that's the way that they're dressed. Oftentimes as well, you'll see some men who choose to wear a kind of hat when they go in, just out of respect when they go into the mosque. It's not something I personally do, but it's something I know a lot of people that do, and again, it's from a kind of similar kind of reasoning point, yeah.
So we have another question here about what you eat and whether you have any special foods in Islam. So I'll start first with Alina. Do you have any special foods that you eat?
Yeah, so I would say, like, first of all, like, because Muslims, we come from like various parts of the world, so we'll all have like our own cultural food that we eat. But Islamically speaking, so what our faith teaches us is we have some sort of golden rules that we need to follow when it comes to food and drink. So the first one is that we need to make sure that our food is halal, and the word halal just means permissible, that it's allowed. And the way that we do that is that we specifically look for halal meat, and whether it's like in meat shops or whether it's in restaurants, because we know that if that meat is halal, it's been blessed with God's name, and that means that we're allowed to eat it. So we're not allowed to eat meat that hasn't been blessed in this way. We also need to make sure that we stay away from alcohol, so whether that's in our food or whether that's actually just drinking it. So that's something that we need to be very careful of, and also that we can't eat any sort of pig, parts of the pig, for example, so whether that's in the form of like bacon or ham or anything like that, or even sometimes in the form of gelatin in certain sweets. So we need to be mindful of that as well. So these are the three sort of golden rules whenever we're looking for food outside. But primarily, I think because we do come from like very varied cultures, we have our own maybe cultural preferences as well and what we like to eat. But in terms of Islamically, those are the kind of three key areas that we need to kind of keep an eye out for.
Thanks, Alina. And how about you, Rakeen? Are there any special foods that you would eat?
Yeah, so I think not so much kind of special foods, but I think what I really like, and I've been thinking about a lot more from an Islamic perspective, is making sure that we eat Islamically in the sense of our eating behaviors and patterns. So you know, it's very easy to kind of eat too much or too little, and to kind of go to two extremes when you're eating, especially to overindulge, you know, maybe kind of eat too many sugary things and sweet things, especially during lockdown. So then I've been thinking about how as Muslims, we're taught everything is a gift from God, including our bodies. So we should be kind of treating that with more respect. And that includes, I guess, what we're eating and what we're kind of putting into our bodies needs to be as kind of good and as clean as possible. Of course, that doesn't mean, you know, maybe we might fall short of that every now and then, but it's also just about being kind of aware of that and having the good intention.
Great, thank you. That's really interesting. So now we're moving on to some questions about how that you both live your lives and what you think about right and wrong. So how to be a good person and what your faith has to say about that. So I'll start with Alina. So what does your religion tell you about being a good person and how you live your life?
So within Islam, a huge focus of the religion is on your own character and your own characteristics and your own actions. So a lot of the time, when it, like, for example, when it comes to what's right and what's wrong, as Muslims, we believe that if you follow the right path and you do what's right, then you will be rewarded for that, both in this life and in the afterlife, because we believe that once we die, there is an afterlife that's to come. And on the contrary to that, like if you don't do what's right, like what's morally right, what's ethically right, and what your religion tells you is right, and you go on the opposite path, then you will have consequences for that as well. And often that can be within this world and within this life. But we also believe that in the afterlife, basically as human beings, we have like two possible destinations. So you can either, if you're good and if you've lived your life well and you've followed everything that God has commanded in the way that you can, then we hope to end up in paradise. But on the contrary, if you haven't really lived a very good life, if you haven't like kind of listened to what God's had to say, then we also do believe that there is the hellfire as well. But like Rakeen said at the very start, although we do believe in this in paradise and in hellfire, we also believe that like the ultimate decision is in God's hands. And sometimes someone might do something that on the outside looks like, oh, that was terrible, that was an evil thing to do, but they might have a change of heart, they might have, I don't know, a different intention that's only between them and God, and that might cause them to actually go to paradise instead of going to hell. So as much as we as Muslims, we're encouraged to try our very best to live as best a life as we can, follow the rules as best as we can, and try our best to follow whatever's right. But if there are, and there always are points, that we're all humans, we're not perfect, so there will be points where you slip, there will be points where you don't follow things as well as you should. And if and when that happens, then we ask God for forgiveness, and we hope in his mercy that he can see that we realize that we've done something wrong, and hopefully either clear us of those sins, or like again show us his mercy and eventually lead us to paradise. So because we always have the idea of paradise and the hellfire in the back of our minds, I think as Muslims that kind of plays a lot in how we do our decision making, how we decide what it is we want to do. And sometimes the more difficult decisions that you are trying to make are made that wee bit easier if you think, in the long run, this will be better for me if I do it this way as opposed to doing it that way. I hope that makes sense.
Yo, that's fine. Thank you. That's great. Rakeen, have you got anything to add to that about right and wrong for you and the way you live your life?
Yeah, I would say for me, like in terms of right and wrong, there definitely seems to be in Islam like a right and wrong. But I would also say that there might be kind of black and white, but there's also grey. So like, you know, things might be right, things might be wrong, but also kind of God understands that we live in it depends on each situation, and by each situation things can be different. In Islam, there's kind of two emphasis on, for example, intention, you know, like what your intention is really, really important. Something might have a bad effect, but you never had the intention for that thing to happen. And that's really, really important because we really value intention. And then the other side of that is also God being really, really forgiving, being the most forgiving. So the Quran constantly mentions that, you know, we were created, but we're not in our conduct, when in our behavior, the way we act, we're not perfect. And God knows that. So I know that when there's right and wrong, I like to view it as things are right, from, you know, my kind of reading of the Quran, kind of things are right for our benefit, and the things that are wrong are kind of not good for us, and those things help me make my decision. And I think also when you take the kind of combination of the Holy Book, the Quran, and the sayings of the Prophet, the Hadith, together, you have such kind of broad statements and such kind of really specific things that actually I don't think there's a kind of element of life that you can't apply the Quran or the Hadith, the sayings of the Prophet to. So really, it does start to kind of you can use it, you know, in every single decision you make. You can use some form of element of Islam in the decisions that you make. But I think everything, at least for me, is premised by, you know, if there is a slip up, at least kind of God is the most forgiving, and you know, God kind of really encourages us to kind of turn back to him when we kind of slip up.
Okay, thank you. That's helpful. So I've got a question in here which is quite interesting, to do with living in Scotland. And the question is, what is it like living your faith in Scotland today? Alina.
I think living or practicing my faith within Scotland today, it's actually quite easy. It can often depend where you are. Certain places can be different. But overall, I would say like my experience has been that it is relatively easy. I hear from a lot of people, like I'm Scottish anyway, but I hear from a lot of people that have come from other countries that Scottish people are very welcoming, they're very open, and a lot of the time, like if they don't understand something, they'll just ask. Whereas some other people might not have that, and they might just assume out of their ignorance sometimes. So, I mean, I'm not saying it's all been plain sailing. I have had some challenging times as well, but I think it doesn't matter what religion you follow, where you come from. Like, we all need to try and understand each other, and if we are all open enough, so if you don't understand something, you ask, or if you need some more clarification, you ask as well. And we try to do it with the intention to get to know one another better, then our society can be even better than what it is just now. But I think being a proud Scot, having lived in Scotland my entire life, I can say that practicing my faith has been challenging, but it also has been quite rewarding as well. And I think now more so, it's a lot easier than it kind of used to be. So for example, when like my parents first came to the country, there was a lot of ignorance around different cultures, different races, different religions, but I think we've all thankfully understood one another a lot better. We've gotten to know each other a lot better, and that has definitely helped in that kind of development as well, and I hope that continues.
Great, thank you. That's good to know. Vicky. Well, you don't live in Scotland, do you? You live in England. We'll just say in the UK.
I did in the UK. I mean, I could say for the four years that I was there, I would say that I had a really positive experience of practicing my faith in Scotland, because I went from London to Fife, and it was a change. But I think I had assumptions that I thought, oh, London's like a big city, and where I'm going is not going to be such a big city, so maybe I'm going to have a lot more misunderstandings. But actually, one thing I think I was really struck by, and Alina touched on it, was people were really just curious, and they asked questions instead of making assumptions, which I really valued. It felt really nice for someone to just ask a question, as opposed to assume something about me and it be, most probably wrong. I really loved that. It was everyone, from someone who was working at university as the delivery man to anyone. It was so lovely, and there was definitely a sense of kind of warmth about that. I definitely say, both in terms of living in England and living in Scotland, and I really liked that I saw this in Scotland as well, was that the Muslim community is pretty organised. So there's a lot of, they're really organised and connected to the wider community. So for, like, I'd be saying about the mosque being kind of like the centre of the community, the Muslim community. One thing I really saw was that the mosque were doing so many initiatives connected to the wider Scottish community, and that was really positive to see, because it gives people an insight into kind of what the mosque is like and what life is like as a Muslim, but also the other way around. So Muslims can meet people of other faiths, meet people who don't have a faith or don't identify with any particular faith, and that's really important, because that kind of shared sense of understanding. I definitely think that my experience was more positive than negative.
Great, thank you. That's really good and positive to know that. That's super. Thank you both for that and sharing that. So I've got two more questions, and the first one is, what do you think religions share in common from the different religions that you know about? Alina.
As far as I know, I think primarily it doesn't matter whether it's a monotheistic religion, like you worship one god, or it's you worship many gods. I think the primary thing that unites most religions is how we treat one another, because even like as a family friend, we are quite close with this elderly lady who's Sikh, and she always tells us what it says in her holy scripture and what they believe. And it's so weird because sometimes I sit there thinking like, it sounds like you're telling me about my religion. And then like I went to a Catholic primary school and a Catholic high school, so listening to what the Bible teaches, and then coming home and knowing what the Quran teaches, and then learning about all these different faiths is kind of, I think the primary thing that I have picked up in my experience is that how you treat one another is very, very important. To look out for one another, to have that sense of humanity. It doesn't matter where anyone comes from, what race they are, what ethnicity they are. And I think that whole kind of love for each other, so love for your brother what you love for yourself, to look out for one another, to help one another in their time of need, all of these things are very, very common values, like common morals that all these religions share. And I think it's like a very good starting point, because sometimes like we're very quick to jump to, oh, I practice this, but yours is different, you practice that. But if we come back to like the similarities, then we'll see we actually do have a lot more in common than we do that divides us. And hopefully that's something that people can begin to see as well as they kind of look into other religions as well.
That's brilliant. Thank you. Super. Ricky, what do you think?
I would honestly just echo that. I think building on that is just the work that each faith community does for the wider community. Like faith communities are always part of a wider community, and oftentimes you see that what they're working towards, or who they're working to help, may not be from the same faith group at all, or they don't identify with any faith, they're a different faith, whatever. But I don't think at least in my experience, I haven't come across a faith that doesn't care about the community and the kind of building that community up, which I really love, because collectively all of the faith communities are working for a better community, which is great for everyone who's living in it.
Super, thank you. And now we're on to the last question, and this is from pupils at Craigie High School in Dundee. And they are asking, why are there so many different beliefs in the world? As we've been having all these sessions, we've had 8 different religions, people sharing their stories, but why are there so many different beliefs and religions? Who'd like to go first on that one?
I'm happy to.
Yeah.
So at least from the kind of my experience of the Islamic perspective, we believe that there are a number of prophets and a number of kind of revelations of these messages from God that come down throughout history, and it's not surprising to us, for example, that we hear names that are also mentioned in the Bible, in the New Testament, in the Old Testament, and we hear these same names because from the Islamic perspective, for example, these people are also prophets sent by God with a message. So the Quran, the Holy Scripture, also talks about Jews, it talks about Christians, it talks about kind of indigenous or kind of native people that were living there. It talks about another group of people called Sabians. So there's so many different types of religions already mentioned right in the Scripture, and that's only in one part of the world. Like this message from God came to what would have been like Arabia, or modern day Saudi Arabia, and to think that that's only just one part of the world, one region. Imagine what was going on in all other parts of the world. So for me, I always like to think of it as God has been kind of communicating with the world, and there are a number of different messages from God that have come down. In the Islamic perspective, the last one is Islam, and that's why Muslims kind of commit to Islam, but it also makes us appreciate all of the other religions that are out there. We always see that as kind of that similarity, or we share maybe a figure or a founding figure, or we share someone in common, and I always love hearing about other people's faiths from their perspective, because I often find there's an overlap, or there's a little bit more detail in that story to something that's already mentioned in the Islamic holy book, the Quran. So I always find that's really interesting. So I think that would be my understanding as to why there's a lot of faiths, because they're kind of messages from God.
At different times. Thanks, Rakeen. And how about you, Alina? What do you think about why there's so many different beliefs in the world?
I think Rakeen summarised it perfectly. Like Islamically, we believe that like there were many prophets over the years, since the start of time up until the last prophet, and they all came with their own messages for their own people, but ultimately everyone's message was the same, which was to believe in one God, which is what we believe. And I think just throughout different times, throughout generations, people have like picked up some things and left other things and found certain things more relevant than others and just kind of stuck with that. So I think a lot of it can be down to like your personal preferences, and a lot of it can be like your influence from your community and your family. So all these things play a part, but I don't think there's like a definite answer. But I think they all, because they are so similar, they are all related in some sort of way. Like I do believe, and I think Islamically we believe that they all originate from the same source.
Great, thank you. Just finished there with a very difficult question, but very well answered by both of you, so thanks very much. So it just remains for me to say thank you both Alina and Rakeen for being with us today and sharing a bit more about your faith, both the practical aspects and your personal views and feelings about it. And I've certainly learned an awful lot, and you've probably learned a bit from each other, and hopefully our viewers will have learned something as well. So thank you very much.
Thank you so much.
Thank you for having us. Thank you.